I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Monday, January the 16th, brought to you in part by Macrocin by Bimeda. Macrocin is a bold, affordable telithromycin injection with no BS. Learn how it compared to Pioneer products in a 4,600 head trial. For more information, go to macrocin.com. Also, Joplin Regional Stockyards, another big run for Joplin. Of course, I realize Joplin is a huge regional market there and a high volume sale, but they've got another 10,000. This will be the third 10,000 head sale that they've had, plus they had a value added sale that was nearly that many, but a lot of big strings of yearlings expected here this Monday morning, and they'll get started early, guys. They'll be on bunches by 6:30 for sure. But check out Joplin Regional Stockyards on dvauction.com here today on Monday morning. They got a big run of cattle there. Largest sale barn week of the year was last week, and I'm talking about receipts. But more cattle will have run through auction barns last week than any week of the year, partly because of the holiday break and guys getting back to business after being off, and cattle stacked up a little bit. Partly because of the time of the year it is, and we got more weaned calves, partly because it's after the new year when guys routinely want to sell their cattle. It hurt the market late in the week, just the sheer numbers of cattle that were selling, and of course being delivered to feedlots and growing yards all over the country, and they can only choke so many of them, and they've got to process all those cattle when they come in. So naturally it's gonna hurt the market on them because they just can't take anymore, and then you run short of trucks also. But we saw a premium being paid in the southern plains, which is not the norm. But we saw higher, both feeder cattle and calves being paid, higher prices being paid in the southern plains. I'm talking below I-70 and all the way down into Oklahoma and southern Kansas than we saw being paid in Iowa and Nebraska and places like that. And the cattle are not as good down there. They're just not. And you don't have that farmer feeder demand in the southern plains, but you saw your big commercial feedlots coming into the market willing to pay for cattle, especially old croppers that have that condition that they want and that quick come on as high as cost of gains are. They want some compensatory gain when they're buying those cattle. There's not any wheat to graze, but as I mentioned earlier this past week, I just think the guys in the southern plains have a better understanding of how tight the numbers are going to be of calves, and so they really went after those stocker calves. Of course, your highest prices on stockers is being paid way out west in and around California, as they've had all that moisture out there, and the grass pastures are going to be outstanding. There's not a cheaper way to put weight on cattle than on grass. And we saw some cattle there at Orland Livestock last week weighing like 470, bringing 281. And I predicted that we'll have $3 calves being advertised here pretty quick within the next couple of weeks, even though our market on feeder cattle is starting to fade a little bit. We've seen the fat cattle market hit a little bit of snag here. It doesn't appear that our cost of gains are going to cheapen up. Our grains were higher this past week with another friendly to the grain market supply and demand report there. So your grain markets were higher this last week, and we're not looking to see any relief on feed costs anytime soon. And so we're starting to see the market back off on feeders, and most of your feeders now, your feeder weight cattle, are just big calves. And like I talked about, your old crop feeders, you're just not seeing as many of those, which those big calves are not going to yield the big prices with those cattle with all the condition. So we're just starting to see the overall market drop back a little bit on your cattle going right into the feed yard. Also starting to see them drop back a little bit on your middleweight calves because there's just so many of them, especially moving up in the northern plains. But stocker calves are still in high demand, and I still think they're cheap, guys. These 4 and 5 weight calves, I realize that they're bringing 230, 240, maybe 250, but they still look cheap compared to some $185, $190, 800-pound steers, which we may not see that much longer. Also, I saw this past week in the news yet another sizable beef processing plant, non-Big Four, is going under construction, and I don't know where all these cattle are going to come from, but Cattlemen's Heritage Beef, Mills County, Iowa. They purchased land right off of I-29 up there, and they plan on breaking ground very soon, and they appear to have the funds that they need, or that's the press release that I saw, to get this done. Going to be a 2,000 a head day harvesting plant, expecting to employ around 800 people. It's probably going to take a year and a half, I would say, for sure, at least, to get that up under construction. But there's another big plant coming in. That's a sizable plant, people, and you add that on to the other ones. There's many others being talked about, but the ones that we believe have the funds and are under construction and are likely to become to be built and come to fruit. You add this plant to the American Food Group's plant near St. Louis. Now they are going to kill probably a lot more cows and Holstein, big Holsteins and things like that. But it's yet another plant. Produce their own beef in Amarillo, Texas, is now going under construction. That's going to be a sizable plant, even bigger than Cattlemen's Heritage. It's going to be, they've got the funds up for that. It's going to happen. And then Sustainable Beef, North Platte, Nebraska, it's going to happen. It's going to be sizable too. And you think, how is that going to change our industry? Well, it's going to take a lot of cattle off the market. It's going to make it tougher for your Big Four. They're likely to have to close some of their plants if these new plants get up and off the ground and get going. And I assume that they know that they're going to have a lot of extra funds in their coffers when they get going, because the Big Four is going to play hardball on them. But most of these plants already have an outlet for their beef. They already have a source for their cattle. And it's not like any of these new packing plants are going to be out buying cattle on the cash market in a direct basis out in the country in the feedlots. They're just not. They know that they that's not a way for them to have profit, except for maybe the American Food Group's plant. They will be buying cattle in auctions and things like that, like they have in their other plant there further north. But they're not going to be in your typical feedlot market for beef, steers, and heifers. They're going to be harvesting more cows and Holsteins and off the main market type thing. But these other plants are all going to be after those highest, best quality cattle, some program cattle and things like that. And a lot of them are going to be set up like U.S. Premium Beef, which has been very successful, and one reason why we can't get any change done, because they've basically become packers themselves, and they run Kansas Livestock Association, which basically runs NCBA. So we haven't been able to get any of the changes done for price transparency and things like that. We've been trying to get going because they're basically packers now. But these new plants are going to be going after these beef, steers, and heifers in the best quality. They're basically selling shackle space to investors, and those that are invested in there and have rights to shackle space will be able to use those, and those will be some of your highest quality feedlots, and they'll be taking their best cattle to those plants. And about the time they open is when we're going to be really, really tight on market-ready cattle. Of course, we're really tight on market-ready cattle now, but it's going to get progressively worse because we're so short of cows, and our calf crop's going to be so much smaller. But it's going to be interesting now we get down the road here, year and a half or two, and see when all those new plants come on board to see how things change. Let's talk about your board for last week. February live cattle futures. Monday they were up 97. And then they really struggled for direction. Tuesday and Wednesday both unchanged, which you just never see that back to back. Thursday down 20 cents, Friday up 17, and like I said, your current live cattle futures spot contract, they're really searching for direction, but settled in about 157.72, which is real close to what our weighted average is so far on last week's 5 area live steer weighted average price there. April ended the week at 160.90. That was up 23 cents for the week. But and the 157.72 for February was up 95 cents for the week. January feeder cattle, now they come out of the gate smoking hot there early in the week, and then when we saw that your grains were getting higher, and then especially on Thursday after we saw the friendly grain reports there to the grain market, we saw your feeder cattle futures going down pretty hard. But Monday, January feeder cattle were up 92. Tuesday they were up 67. Wednesday down 117, Thursday down $1, Friday down 87, with January feeder cattle contracts ending the week at 181.25. That was down $1.45 for the week. March feeder cattle ended the week at 182.87, down 278 for the week. Fat cattle trade through Thursday, they had only sold 30,900 negotiated in your 5 area feeding region. Now they did have a pretty sizable trade on Friday, but still all totaled up just barely half what they need to be purchasing, especially after a big week last week and expecting another big harvest week this week to kind of catch back up from the holiday interruptions. But live sales, steers and heifers last week, direct sales out of your feedlots 155 to 159. That's $2 higher on the bottom side, $1.50 lower on the top side. Weighted average on live steers in your 5 area up through Thursday last week was 157.61, down 13 cents, so which is not the direction that we're wanting to go, but fairly close to steady. And then your dress sales last week, steers and heifers ranged from 248 to 250, 275, which was steady on the bottom side, and 3.25 cents lower, or $3.25 lower on the top side, because we had some of those cattle at 256 last week. There wasn't a lot of them, but they made it in there. We didn't see anything like that this week. But your weighted average on dress steers last week up through Thursday was 250.93, down $1.12. Then we see your market on Friday. I expected it to get better. I thought we'd get some 160 on Friday. The guys that were left to sell negotiated on Friday, did not stay hooked. They did not dig in. The packers convinced them, because box beef cutout values have been dropping, and you know, just everything that's going on, getting back into full swing of things. They worked the market lower, especially in the southern plains, $1 lower. But Iowa sold 2,600 head on Friday, just 18,700 head for the week last week. Live sales on Friday from 156 to 159, which is as good as we had all week. And dress sales 250 to 252. But in Nebraska, 7,500 head sold on Friday, 20,400 head for the week. Live sales on Friday, 156. You know, that's $1 or $2 lower. Not a lot of cattle moved at 156, but enough to matter. Dress sales from 250 to 252, which was basically steady with the previous week. Kansas, 7,100 head on Friday, just 8,600 head for the week. Live sales on Friday in Kansas range from 155 to 157, but mostly 156, and that'd be $1 lower. Texas, 4,600 head on Friday, just 5,100 head for the week, which is nothing. And all the sales in Texas at 156 on Friday, fully $1 lower. Box beef cutout values were mixed, with choice down and selects up, with your weighted average on all of last week's sales. Choice cuts down 251 compared to the previous week's weighted average, sitting at 281.10, and late week sales were $4.50 lower than that on choice cuts Friday afternoon at 276.62. Selects, your weighted average on all of last week's sales, 257.99. That was up $1.16, but your late week sales Friday afternoon were $1 lower than that weighted average. but your choice select spread on your weighted average of last week's sales was $23.11, based on 586 loads of cuts, grinds, and trimmings on last week's spot sales box beef cutouts. Slaughter for last week, 661,000, very respectable. Almost 100,000 more than the previous week, which was during a holiday, so you can't really count that. But 43,000 more than the same week a year ago after the holidays. So big week there, but couldn't manage to keep your fat cattle market steady at that. But talk about your feeder cattle market, your real-time index based on an 800-pound steer up through the middle 12 states, cash price in the sale barns that Cattle Market Central collects information, 179.06, down 97 cents compared to the end of the previous week. So like I said, those weights of cattle going right into the feedlot were cheaper. Your cash feeders last week, your trends for the week out of the sales, which a lot of them earlier in the week were compared to 2 weeks ago, but mid to late week sales were mostly compared to the previous week. And your feeder cattle going right into the feedlot, like I said, unevenly steady to a buck lower, and they're just a little bit easier around. We saw a few sales in the Southern Plains sell 800-pound steers with an 8 with a front figure at 190 or a pinch better, but we didn't see that in the Northern Plains. So like I said, the guys in the Southern Plains were a little more aggressive. Calves last week, your stalker calves, $2 to $7 higher, and I still think they're cheap, but $2 to $7 higher. And guys are scrambling to get their grass cattle put together, even though they really don't have anything to hold them on until the grass gets here. But middleweight feeder calves steady to $3 lower in most of your sales last week. Look at your big sales late last week and over the weekend. How about Fort Scott Livestock Market in Fort Scott, Kansas? They have a big sale on Saturday every week. 3,300 head this past Saturday. Good sale for them, just like everywhere else. Calves were a bit higher and feeders a bit lower. You look at these loads that I pulled off Fort Scott sale there on Saturday, and you see 59 steer calves weighed 619 at 205, very respectable, and 55 steers weighed 881 at 175.75, which is a little more moderated from what we've been seeing. Talk about your Zoetis stick out sale of the day for late last week and over the weekend. It was on Friday at Winter Livestock Auction in Winter, South Dakota. 3,800 head. Now this is compared to a much lighter run the previous week where they had weather interruptions of 1,700 there, but about $3 to $7 lower for the most part, and selling mostly calves. But you look at your best tested weights out of Winter, South Dakota, you see 525 head, 5-weight steer calves, average 546, weighted average price $210.95. 1,241 head of 6-weight steer calves in Winter, average $656 with a weighted average price of $192.46. 553 head of 7-weight steers, be mostly calves, but weaned in Winter, South Dakota, average $737 with a weighted average price of $180.27. And your best tested weights of heifers, 769 head of 6-weight heifer calves, average 640 pounds, weighted average price $179.01, and that was pretty much steady. I'm sure helped out by a little picking around from some guys that are wanting to buy some keeping heifers. Talk about some individual quotes around. How about Sterling Livestock Commission in Sterling, Colorado? 148 steers weigh 591, bring 215.50 in Sterling, Colorado. And I'll tell you what, it's dry there. How about up north, public auction yards? That's Pays and Billings, Montana. 63 steers weigh 518 pounds at 252. Thought that was pretty impressive. But the most impressive quote that I saw late last week or over the weekend in your Macrison No BS top quote for the day, come out of Lexington Livestock Market in Lexington, Nebraska. 186 steers weighed 924 and bring 184.85. That's your feeder flash for Monday.